Welcome all. Hi, I'm Nanette Carter, and we're interviewing Robin Holder today. Robin is actually taking part in the exhibition along with 44 other artists. The exhibition is titled Creating Community, Cinque Gallery Artists. This will be at the Art Students League in their Phyllis Harriman Mason Gallery. The exhibition starts May 3rd and continues to July 4th. Welcome, welcome, Robin. Good to see you and all of the artwork here. I love looking at all that's going on in your studio. Thank you for welcoming us to your studio. I just wanted to know first off, what was your first connection to Cinque Gallery? And if you could give us a time frame, and certainly whoever actually kind of gave you the word about the space.
Okay, well, thanks, Nanette. I was attending the Art Students League the fall of 1969, and I met Norman Lewis and Ricky Mayhew, and they told me about this wonderful new gallery that was dedicated to featuring African-American artists. So from my late teens, I had it in my mind that this is something to aspire to. Maybe when I get my visual language together and I work for a number of years, I'll be able to join the exhibiting artists. So that's when I first heard of Cinque. It must have been in fall of 69 or early 1970.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first year it opened, so you were
Mm-hmm.
right
Mm-hmm.
on. But you're a New Yorker, Robin, aren't you? You've been in New York.
Yeah, actually, both of my parents were New Yorkers, but they met at the University of Chicago. My dad was in the Air Force and was on the GI Bill. And my mom had grown up in Forest Hills. My dad grew up in Bed-Stuy, Barbadian family. My mom was from Russian Jews. When I was 6, we returned to New York City, and I grew up pretty much on the Upper West Side in Washington Heights.
And so you knew about the Art Students League also then at a pretty young age. You had heard about this institution.
Well, I did know about the Art Students League also because my grandfather had a dental practice in the Steinway building at 111 West 57th Street. So I had, seen that. And when I was in my junior and senior year in high school, I decided I did not want to go to college, which freaked out my principal at Music and Art, LaGuardia School for the Arts. And my mom said, well, you can't just do nothing. So I applied for a scholarship at the Art Students League. And so that's where I went for 2 years.
Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Also, Robin, tell us about the exhibitions. I believe you were in a couple of exhibitions at Cinque.
Yes, I was. I think it was Unique Editions, the process. It was a printmaking show. And I believe that was one of the group shows that I participated in around 1996. And of course, a lot of the works in that show were coming from artists who are connected with the printmaking workshop, where I had worked for many years. I had been the assistant director for about 9 years, and I did my prints there until I got my own printing press and set up my own studio. Mm-hmm. So where there was this, interweaving intersection, of course, because you were part of it, between Cinque Gallery and the artists that were featured there, and the printmaking workshop and the Children's Art Carnival and Just Above Midtown and Ken Keleba and the June Kelly Gallery. There was this whole really exciting number of platforms where we all sort of connected and intersected, worked together and chatted and saw each other's work.
You're right. It was really a great cross-pollination that was going on. It was amazing to see the people of color really building and establishing these institutions for ourselves, because we were not being invited at all to show in museums or galleries at that point. And so we made these institutions for ourselves to show the talent. I was wondering also, Robin, we're going to look at this first piece that's called No Toy Guns. Was this also in one of those shows at Cinque?
No, that was one of the autobiographical pieces that I made. There are about 30 pieces in that series, from an old sort of riddle when we were kids, what's black and white and red all over, which was supposed to be the answer was a newspaper. But in my case, it's what's black and white and red all over, an African-American, Russian, Jewish red diaper baby. So that series I must have started it just before I got the Brooklyn Arts Council Fellowship. So it must have been like the mid 1990s. And I was tracking how I became aware of my racial, religious, social, cultural, class identity from the age of about 6 up to about 16. So the piece No Toy Guns is, many of the works sort of have split panels.
I love it. It's a triptych.
Right.
It's really
Right.
a triptych. Yeah.
Because the idea was the inner dialogue that you create becomes your guide for navigating society. And we all have like an interior conversation that we're always having. And when we communicate with the outside world, and of course, people of color or anybody who's being marginalized in any way by society is code switching all the time and translating and deciphering whatever situation they're involved in to be able to be as appropriate and productive as possible. And of course, we know all people of color do this automatically, and it's extremely complex.
Yeah.
So the reason for these split panels is to show that even though I was having fun playing jacks and having a really glorious childhood, there were these thoughts and introductions by my family to the larger world of racism, imperialism, capitalism, and discrimination, and so on and so forth. So the idea is, and actually that series is the beginning of me starting to include text in my imagery.
Well, what's so interesting too is though, you're talking about when you were young and your thoughts, that was what, 50 years ago, and it still hasn't changed? Not really.
I know, it's rather appalling, and that you selected
It's
that.
very timely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even today. Yeah.
I mean, the on the left panel of No Toy Guns, there's a police with a gun pointing at the head, and the man's head is on the ground, and it just, it's just reminiscent of what happened to George Floyd. This is like you say, half a century later, and we're still dealing with this.
In a nation of democracy and everyone's supposed to be equal, citizens, that's not the case, still. The other thing too is how color really informs this piece. Now, I believe, Robin, this is the work that's in the exhibition.
Yes, it is. No Toy Guns is in the, yeah.
Excellent. And now I wanted to move on to La Mirada Dos. If you could tell us about that piece, beautiful woman.
Yeah, thank you. That was a piece that I did. I had been invited for a grant to use the Manhattan Graphic Center, and I believe I was the first African-American guest artist there. And I did some work, and at the end of the period that I was working in their studio, I printed a lot of small papers with Black leaves and foliage on Black, Arches covered Black paper, because I knew I would use it later. And years later, I found them in the studio, and I started creating these monoprints of women's faces because I was working on my Warrior Women's series. So that image has these layers of different technical applications. It's got some stencil printing where I surface inked acetate stencils that I made with lithographic inks, and it's got a painterly image that I applied on a piece of plexiglass that were printed on this paper that had a silk screen image of leaves on it. And then the funny part about that piece, Nanette, is that it's a companion piece to La Mirada Tres, which is a piece that the actor Mary Alice bought as a gift for Angela Bassett when she got married. But when she got it home, she decided she liked it too much.
Oh my
so
Lord.
she put it in her bedroom and never gave it to her.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That's
So I mean, it's interesting because, as you know, we make work and we have a certain intention and an application, and then the work goes on to live in different platforms and realities.
And you have absolutely no control over it. But you really
Right.
truly are a mixed media artist. And I like the way that you build up your surfaces. They're very rich. At one point, they're very graphic, but then they're very painterly. And this one, you have kind of an outline, a very light outline, almost a halo effect around her face.
Yeah, just to kind of punch it up, Yeah, I try to use color in a way that it calls the viewer somehow. Something magical, like something like I want it to be like a little glow.
Now, I wanted to move on now to Ritual Bath, which also appears to be using sort of the stencil effect you were talking
Yes.
about just a minute ago.
Yeah. So in those images, I'm cutting out these acetate stencils, and the material is actually the theater scrims that they use to color the lights in the theater. And what was wonderful about that material is you can cut it very easily with a matte knife or an X-Acto knife with a pair of scissors, and it resists any of the solvents or oils that you need to use to clean them. So I sort of think as if I were creating a collage, and all of those separate acetate stencils become a kind of a language, because I was never interested or good at editioning as a printmaker and creating an image and then just producing it. I'm not really good at that. As a matter of fact, it reminds me when I returned from Europe and I went to Bob Blackford. He said, "Do you want me to train you as a printer?" And I said, "Well, what would that mean?" He said, "That would mean we would train you technically as a printer, and then you could like print prints for people like Elizabeth Catlett." And I said, "Oh, I don't think I have the ego to do that." Because I think you have to, as a printer, you have to step back.
Yes, you do. You were truthful. I just get bored. I feel like I want to move on to something else or add a different color or change it up. I get bored.
I understand. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, it takes a certain artist to be able to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, you really have to have that real passionate mindset, which I do not have. So what I developed was my own strategy for creating separate elements, shapes that I could ink and then put on top of a piece of inked linoleum or inked plexiglass and print, and then use them in other constructions, in other configurations again. So the stencils, they actually become like a vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So this is the material.
Wonderful. The other thing I'm noticing are these triptychs. To enliven and enrich your storytelling, it's interesting how you section them off. In this one, these are really elongated panels almost, taking on maybe a feeling of some of the Asian art that we would see in these panels, these screens. I think it really adds to the drama. Also, I love the way that there's this subtle change of colors between these different panels. And then the lower area, you have what looked to me to be animals and bugs and different other things that would be outdoors. Yeah, speak to us about the imagery itself, because it appears as though you're talking about the out of doors.
Some of my work is so painful The social justice work, it has a lot of really difficult issues about victimization and marginalization in it. I also create works that are nature-based. So I use a lot of images of leaves and plants and animals, and it's kind of a way to balance out my psyche so that I don't get overcharged with the horror of the other works that I'm dealing with. Because you can't, I mean, I still have to, you know, remain positive as a person and hopeful. And so I have this kind of dual kind of approach to the imagery. There's a whole, you know, line of works that I do, often using metallic inks or holographic foils, something that's a little sparkly, just to give me pleasure and give me joy.
You know, we all need that balance. And I'll tell you, I
Mhm.
think especially during this time of COVID, some people are not able to find that balance. I think as artists, we're very lucky in that way, because I think by creating, there is this sense of beauty, and that there's hope, and that you can continue on. I wanted to move on now, Robin, if we would, to Shield of Memory.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another one, it seems to be maybe of the same time period, with the
Mm-hmm.
use of the
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
stencils. And tell us a little bit about this story.
It's really addressing questions of, is there ancestral memory? Do we inherit the awareness from our people that came before us? Is there something in our psyche or unconsciously in our construction that informs us about the world that we live in? Are there ways that we tap into something that's maybe on a psychic level or an intuitive level? And that's another piece, as you said, that's sort of like in this forested, magical kind of environment. That's part of my Warrior Women series. So that's what that is. And it's about reflecting and contemplating, which, of course, as you practice as an artist yourself, Nanette, artists spend a lot of time reflecting and thinking and cross-referencing and asking questions and trying to pinpoint the essence of an issue or a material or a technique or a texture to reveal it in a meaningful way that expresses something unique about who we are. So that figure is sort of like in a meditative, contemplative mode.
Mhm. Wonderful. I want to move on now to the COVID series, which I
Mm-hmm.
think we're also seeing on your wall there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's wonderful to get a sense of the scale. People never really understand scale, of course, when we see it on a screen, but
Right.
to see this in your studio really is quite informative. Now, if we would start with the one where it's a nurse, it clearly is a nurse with the nurse's garb on, she has on, and then she has the mask on. And of
Mm-hmm.
course, this series, the I believe the entire title is COVID-19 First Responders, We're in It Together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's the whole concept, is that, you know, COVID came toward the end of that horrific 4 years of the Trump administration, where we became so aware of the polarization in our country. I think many of us, many of us were not really that surprised, but what we were really startled by was the numbers of people who supported Trump. And I truly am convinced that the majority of them are not racists and are not wishing anybody harm. They're just caught up in a limited understanding of the history of this country and the realities that people have suffered, and the digitization of our communications has really done us disservice, because you can live in a bubble. We all live in a bubble. So the idea is we're in it together, and we have to try to move through this together. So I was trying to find a way to express that visually. So the pieces have, figures who are first responders, like there's a truck driver, there's an x-ray technician, the one behind me is a supermarket clerk. And I kind of thought of one of my neighbors up here at the studio who is a wonderful person who works at Costco. So we're going about our lives really carrying each other with us. And of course, the really difficult existence of the first responders in the terms of not having the right compensation, not having the health care, the child care, the insurance that they need, not having a pay scale that they deserve. They were holding the society together. They still are. But I started these probably in April or May of 2020. And at that point, that's, in April, nobody was on the street. Nobody was in their car. Nobody was on the subway. Nobody was on the bus. So the first responders were the people that were moving around.
Yeah. And again, I'm looking at this one in particular where at the bottom of the image, it appears to be the woman with her eyes. She looks extremely tired. Just, yeah, really beautiful piece. Am I looking at rope behind her? Is that what's holding us all together? It looks as though there's almost a
Yeah,
kind of
it's
rope.
yeah. You're the first person that noticed or said anything about
Well,
it. Yeah, it's
the
like
other thing I want to
ropes.
say too about this series, real quick, if I could, when you talk about Trump, I think that this idea that we're all in it together also is just so important, even outside of COVID, that in
Mm-hmm.
this country, Black, white, brown, yellow, I don't care, we're all in this together.
Exactly.
And I think that there's really, I love it when artwork has multiple facets to it.
Mm-hmm.
And as I look at this one with the rope, again, this idea of holding something together, it looks as though there's a structure, maybe
Mm-hmm.
even a house or something that might even be coming down. So I love it when there are multi layers, in a piece. That's what keeps me there. That's what keeps me looking at it, and questioning and wondering.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that because it means that what I intend to do is being perceived the way I hope that it's perceived. And interestingly, that you mentioned it looked like it was a house because at the top of all those images is these it's like it's a silhouette of an image of a house in construction. So the idea is that the house is the identity of ourselves, our country, our neighborhoods, our family, the world, the global universe. And we're in construction. We're building. We have to rebuild. So I'm trying to find ways to visually depict, as you said, all these layers, and those ropes are sort of like the bonds that tie us together. And at the same time, compositionally, they function as a pattern in the background. So I'm always trying to figure out ways to make these layers integrate in some kind of way that's decipherable and that you could look at and think about and reflect upon and talk about from different angles.
And then I think formally also your work, because you're dealing with many types of textures. I know with some of the pieces, the tooth of the paper really seems to be revealed. I think that your surfaces are really very rich. So just formally, I think also the structures, again, some of the more graphic kind of qualities, especially with the house that you say is being constructed, and then that white background, it's really very dramatic and piercing. I'm moving on now to another COVID-19 piece.
That's one of the ones that I thought was more successful. Of course, we have an intention, a vision when we're working, and the work doesn't always come out the way we intended. But it might be because I'm just a control freak.
Well,
But yeah, that one I thought really kind of met the sensibility and the vision that I had when I started it. And again, just like the ropes, through these tree branches, we always think of the tree of life, the family trees, what binds people together, how society and communities sort of grow and spread out. So again, as you had mentioned before, Nanette, I'm trying to find ways to use textures and abstract forms and figurative forms in some kind of a way that gives you food for thought, we could say, or that has meaning. I'm a little obsessed with being meaningful.
You know what? That's okay. That's
Yeah.
okay. I do want to ask you this because I think you're right. Your work is very socio-political. Is there something that your parents, were they involved in the movement? What got you into needing to talk about the issues of the day?
Well, it's the way I grew up. My mother basically told me when I was younger, and my brothers, the society is not really here to support Negroes. At the time we were Negroes. Mm-hmm. And knowing my independence, she said,
she was worried. She was worried.
How am I going to get Robin to?
You want to stay alive, Robin, stay alive.
She would always say, you have to figure out who, why, what, when, where, and how. What are people's motives? Why are they doing something? What does it mean to you? Where are you going to go with this information? And never just take the standard definition of words from the dictionary, because after all, Merriam-Webster was a fascist racist. So this is my mother. It was like no toy guns.
Child growing up in this country, right? Of freedom.
And then, of course, both of my brothers were Black Panthers.
Oh,
later on. Yeah.
Wow.
And then my father, when he was at the University of Chicago, was one of the activists, and he was the one who was marking all of the newly formed countries in Africa, and he was part of this activist group. And then my grandfather's brother was one of the members of the early Socialist Party. So from both sides of the family, we had this activist political sort of a training, and I lived in the Upper West Side. I went to a lot of friends. Similarly, I went to interracial camps in the summertime. I'm probably one of the renegades because I got involved in trying to figure out how spirituality figured into politics. So I kind of added another level and dimension to it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, your rich life and experiences, I think, really show up in the work. I'm going to go on to this next piece, which I love. This is the one where we actually see this roof of the home and all of the different people possibly living in that structure. And I guess this was maybe an apartment building. It looks as though there's the use of photography here. You seem to be possibly drawing. Is this color pencil? Tell us some of the materials and all that you're using.
So that I did in 2019. And it's part of the series that I developed called Access and Inequities. I hear you, can you see me? And it's about the fact that in New York City, we really are convinced that we live in this multifaceted, very diverse community, and often in an apartment building, but we really don't know the backstories or the challenges or the sufferings or the triumphs of the people that are physically within 12 feet of us. So it's got text in it that some of the text I had gathered from oral histories that I gathered from people through interviewing them, and some of them are sort of storytellings about experiences that I had. But the way that I created that was I draw with colored pencils portraits, and sometimes I draw them on top of paper that I have printed stencil shapes on, so that there are colors and forms that kind of pop up in the faces. And then I digitally collage the portraits with textures. And in this case, it was, again, a silhouette of a house in construction, and it has elements of parts of a collapsing building. You can see little like rubble and the texture of the roof. And then digitally, I have that image printed out in a large format printer. And then I draw on top of that and paint with acrylic paints on top of that.
Wow.
So it's again, layering, processing, because I am not physically capable of printing that large. So several years ago, I started to develop that approach to creating some of my larger pieces.
Now, tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel like I see Steve Mayo in the right side there.
Yeah, he's there.
Yes, he is.
Yeah, he's a good
Smiling.
man. Who you actually curated into
That's
a
right.
show at Cinque.
I did. And those were his ceramic pieces.
Those were
though.
her ceramic pieces, and it was with Cheryl
Yeah.
Hanna.
We could go on for hours, Robin.
We
I've
could.
known
We
you for years.
absolutely
I think I
could.
met you at the Bob Blackburn Atelier, I think years ago. And thank you so much for your time, and also all of this information about your process. Fascinating. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nanette.
All
And
right.
thank you, Art Students League, and thank you, Cinque Gallery.
Yes, indeed.